in the dead of night. While everyone else slept, the only sound in the still darkness was someone breathing, and the owner of that faint breath was the person beside her. He was a man with a high, straight nose and a smooth brow, his sharply defined features like an ancient sculpture. He was Raphael Astalidladovica, the Grand Duke. He was the emperor's nephew, a war hero, the greatest pillar of the continent, and the commander of the organization she served under, the Black Dragon Knights. And now he was using his subordinate as a body pillow. It was a long story. Charlotte, pinned beneath him, felt unbearably heavy. After spending the whole day cleaning this inhuman superior's office, she had finally been released from training hell. During her attempt to escape, her wig had fallen off. Now that her identity as a Black Dragon Knight had to be abandoned forever, there was no time left. She meant to leave just like this, but she didn't know the person behind her was already awake. Watching her departing back, he said, "Let's turn the clock back." The ancient and noble Brabant Count family, Count and Countess Brabant, had two daughters they treasured like jewels. The elder daughter, Grace, was wise and renowned for her virtue, perfectly fulfilling every expectation of an heir. The younger daughter, Charlotte, was free-spirited and unrestrained. She was regarded as a swordsmanship prodigy. Although she and her sister had lost their mother young, their loving father filled both roles and raised them without a care. She had always believed their future would be full of happiness. But when she was 13, their father's sudden death changed everything. After losing both parents, what shocked her even more than having to rely only on her sister was remembering that this was the world of a novel. And this story did not have a happy ending. More precisely, it ended with the death of her beloved sister, the heroine. The Rose of Brabant was the romance novel she had adored in her previous life. Though short, it told the brief life of her sister Grace. In the story, the male lead was a commoner knight named Ethan. But after their father's death, the story took a tragic turn. To protect the family, Grace, as the eldest daughter, chose a political marriage with an old nobleman. Instead of staying with the man she loved, Ethan. As a commoner knight, Ethan could only stand by helplessly. Afterward, he quietly volunteered for an expedition. Time flew by, and what lonely Grace received was news of her former lover, Ethan's death. And that was the end of the story. A bad ending. No hope, no dream. At that moment, her sister was still comforting her, saying everything would be all right, that no matter what happened, she would protect her. If this really was the world of the novel, then the warmth of her sister's embrace was unbearably real. Everything began after their father's death. Grace was not yet married, and Ethan had not yet departed. There was still a chance to rewrite the future. She had to make sure Grace would not be trapped in a political marriage. That way, she could reclaim the love that had been rejected for the sake of aid and reach a perfect ending. But 4 years had passed since she decided to change the future, and she still had accomplished nothing. She had tried directly telling Grace about the future plot twists, but Grace only treated it like the ramblings of a child. She had tried providing financial support, but the mine she mentioned as aid had already been claimed. Countless other attempts had all failed for one reason or another. The family's finances had already begun to decline. Ethan had also stopped visiting. It had been 4 years. How was she supposed to change the future? Someone called her by her nickname, Sasha. "What are you doing?" It was Joan Albrecht. He came from the famed swordsmanship house, the Albrecht Marquis family, and was also her childhood friend. Joan's father was her godfather and swordsmanship teacher. She often practiced at the Albrecht training grounds, and he had come to check on her. He also said he had heard that Miss Grace was discussing a marriage alliance with Duke Herman. Charlotte was stunned. He had heard it from his father. The Albrecht family excelled at gathering information. Charlotte felt like the sky was collapsing. That moment was almost here. For years of effort were about to go to waste. At this point, she could only send that old Duke to his grave. Joan hurriedly stopped her. Swordsmanship lessons were not meant for that. But Charlotte could not just stand by and watch her sister marry that man. Joan told her to calm down. His parents would also do everything they could to stop the marriage alliance. No matter how much political power he had, the age gap was still there. He was 80. Grace's fiancé was that old Duke Herman. The man could force their family into a marriage alliance. He carried enormous weight in political circles. He was even the emperor's husband. To be honest, as long as her sister was happy, Charlotte did not care whom she married. But it absolutely could not be the old Duke. anyone but him. Once Grace made up her mind, she would never change it. Persuasion from family would not work. Then Charlotte suddenly thought of someone. If Ethan persuaded her, she might change her mind. To meet Ethan, she would have to go to the Grand Duke's Black Dragon Knights. Years earlier, Ethan had joined the Black Dragon Knights under Grand Duke Ludovica in order to earn title. Grand Duke Ludovica had once been Joan's father's student. If she could use that connection, she might be able to visit the Grand Duke's estate. Joan was going to see the Grand Duke next week. Her hopes rested on him. She had to go too. That's right. There was no time left to waste. This was the last method. Ethan had to personally persuade Grace. At that moment, she still had no idea that the Black Dragon Knights were the domain of that mad Grand Duke, the strongest man in the world. Charlotte made a plan. First, she would disguise herself as a guard knight and go with him to the Grand Duke's residence. Then, while Joan was speaking with the Grand Duke, she would secretly slip away. Next, she would go to the knight's quarters, find Ethan, and have him persuade Grace. If Grace changed her mind, then she could marry Ethan, and Charlotte's mission would be a success. Everything was for her sister's happiness. She was excitedly explaining all this when she failed to notice her master standing behind her. The moment she saw him, she nearly died of fright. She hurried to explain, but a scolding was unavoidable. After being thoroughly chewed out, she went home, silently blaming Joan. He had actually tattled on her. Weak and helpless, she could only hide in a corner. Joan told her to behave and wait, but she still could not rest easy. When she returned, she found a carriage she had never seen before outside the house. And that voice was Duke Herman's. They were discussing the time of the engagement. Grace hoped to announce it after the autumn harvest. That was around Miss Charlotte's coming-of-age ceremony, though the exact date had not yet been set. After that, there would be one family. He had promised to care for Miss Charlotte as though she were his own daughter. Only after he left did Grace collapse to the floor, unable to hold herself up any longer. She told the butler not to inform her younger sister. When the time was right, she would tell Charlotte herself. Even at a time like this, she was still worrying about Charlotte. Charlotte thought it over. The engagement had not yet been announced. Even after autumn had only just been mentioned. She still had a chance. She definitely could do it. But the next day, she was confined by the household. They even made wanted posters of her. Even so, Sasha would not give up. Even without a carriage, she would walk there. She slipped away while the Marquis family's knights were not paying attention. After avoiding the knights sent after her, she headed straight for the Grand Duke's residence, escaping with her perfect disguise. But entering the Grand Duke's residence was not that easy. Visitors without invitations could only get in by enlisting in the Black Dragon Knights, and that was even faster. She heard the inspection was extremely strict. Just a look at your palms could get you rejected. Someone with a beard might be hiding blades in it. After hearing that, she threw away the fake beard. And that person was the inspector? Blood-red eyes, strikingly handsome, and carrying an extraordinary presence. He looked terrifying. Soon it was Charlotte's turn. She had to leave him with nothing to criticize. The ultimate secret art of the Brabant family. Her angelic smile formula. But he immediately declared her unqualified. Next, Charlotte suspected he had not even finished inspecting her. After all, she looked so harmless. His reason was that her smile was too irritating. Seeing she was about to be thrown out, she simply sat on the ground and refused to leave. A normal person would have backed down by now, but in order to enter the Grand Duke's residence, she caused a huge commotion. Seeing how agitated she was, Romeo stepped in. The matter could not be allowed to grow. They just needed to inspect her and throw her out afterward. He grudgingly tolerated it and moved to check her hands. Charlotte practically shoved her hand into his face. On closer inspection, he noticed her hands bore the marks of sword training, and she clearly was no ordinary person. He let Charlotte pass. Romeo could not understand his lord's decision, but he did not mind that Charlotte was skilled with a sword. In any case, since she had come because of the rumors, it might be interesting to see what sort of person had appeared. For a long time, he had been the target of constant assassination attempts. Because he had a claim to the throne, one of the most common methods used was seduction. In dealing with them, he had replaced all the attendants and knights in his residence with men and spread word that he was homosexual. He strongly suspected Charlotte had been sent to seduce him. Meanwhile, Charlotte had used her real name when she signed up. They gave her the number 87. She had originally worried that even if she got into the Grand Duke's residence, she still would not be able to approach Ethan. But fortunately, this batch was meant to enter the ducal office where the Night Order was stationed. She still had a chance to meet Ethan. After passing the first round of testing, there was actually a second round. She would have to wait to be called again. Valen wanted to introduce himself. He said the second round was a survival match. Each group had about 20 people, and there were 3 groups in total. Everyone had already chosen their weapons. This test concerned the honor of the Black Dragon Knights. Getting into one of the Empire's 3 great Night Orders was not easy. The master of the Black Dragon Knights, nephew of the reigning emperor, war hero who repelled the neighboring nation's invasion, and loyal vassal awarded title and lands by the emperor. For that reason, the Grand Duke held immense influence not only in the military, but also on the frontier. It made sense that the procedures were so complicated. For her sister's sake, Charlotte would give everything she had to win. Watching from afar, Joan had also once considered taking the famous Black Dragon Knight's entrance test. Then he suddenly noticed someone, and his expression darkened. Sasha? Why is she here? When Grand Duke Ludovica asked whether he had seen her before, Joan could only lie. He said they had practiced swordsmanship together as children, but he had not seen her since. The Grand Duke found that amusing. He really wanted to know who had sent this little spy. The second test ended faster than Charlotte had imagined. It was said to be the shortest one in the history of the Night Order. 3 people passed in total. The first was a man who claimed to be a mercenary, Valen. The second stunned everyone with his bizarre swordsmanship, Klaus. And the last was Charlotte, Sasha. But she never expected there to be a third test. At this rate, would she ever get to see Ethan? Something kept flashing. Wasn't that the Albrecht family brooch? It was Joan. He pulled Charlotte into a corner and demanded to know what she would do if she were discovered. But Charlotte did not care. After all, he had helped conceal her identity. Right now, this was still her best plan. She was not afraid of being discovered by the Grand Duke. Her sister's situation was more important. Joan had no choice but to compromise. He had heard there had recently been more and more people trying to assassinate the Grand Duke. It was already difficult enough to meet an ordinary knight, much less gain access to the Grand Duke ahead of time. Soon it was time for the third test. Charlotte made him swear to keep it secret. Joan looked at her with concern. Joining the Night Order itself was not the problem. Unless she got expelled, how exactly was she planning to leave later? She, Valen, and Klaus were placed in the same group because their skill levels were similar. It was basically an honors club. Valen was clearly a highly talented mercenary, and Klaus specialized in utterly unpredictable swordsmanship. So they all should have passed the third round smoothly. But someone had seen Charlotte speaking with Joan, and from a distance he sneered. Vigland, the second son of the Egtra family, thought Charlotte had gotten in through the back door. While Klaus and Valen spoke in her defense, Charlotte began gathering strength. Then she kicked him flying with a single blow. She had not wanted to bother with him, but he talked far too much. So Charlotte decided to prove herself with strength. Raphael and Romeo were still discussing Charlotte. She had passed the second round smoothly and had even gained the title of a swordsmanship prodigy. Meanwhile, the person they were talking about was still fighting. She truly was eye-catching, using astonishing speed to make up for the disadvantages of her light, small frame. It was a crushing victory. Raphael walked over and said enough. Charlotte recognized him as the man she had seen during the first round. Someone stopped Charlotte and told her he was the infamous madman from the rumors. Charlotte immediately bristled. That was hardly a flattering title. He explained that the third test would be a spar against him. When she heard others call him Your Highness, Charlotte finally realized that this man was Grand Duke Raphael Ludovica himself. The two of them began at once. Charlotte quickly found herself at a disadvantage. To swing such an enormous greatsword with one hand at such terrifying speed, it was as if she were facing a monster. The rumors that he was the strongest sword saint in the Empire were clearly no exaggeration. If even the edge of his blade grazed her, she would be finished. No matter what, she had to win. Dragging things out would not help her. Once her stamina ran out, she would be doomed. As for speed, she had never once neglected her training. His Highness was forced back, but then he blocked her attack with his bare hand. He flicked Charlotte's sword aside, and her wrist nearly broke. He was unbelievable. He had actually caught a blade with his hand. When Charlotte protested, he pinched her cheek and said she talked too much, and that they would be seeing each other often from now on. Then he turned and left. He said to place that child under his command. Valen came over and praised her. She had actually scored points against his Highness. and she became the first person to pass, officially joining the Black Dragon Knights. Charlotte could hardly believe it. So this really was a Knight Order entrance test. A week had already passed since she accidentally joined the Black Dragon Knights. To solve everything, she had tried looking for Ethan. After briefly worrying about the unexpected turn of events, she thought that if she maintained her status as a knight, she would eventually meet Ethan. Clinging to that hope, she endured each day. He was away on assignment in another region and was supposed to return in autumn. And since her cover still had not been blown, she had to stay here for now. Joan told her to leave at once, but Charlotte absolutely refused to give up. She thought that when the time came, she could surely get rid of this identity. Black Dragon Knight's instructor Aaron began explaining the knight ranks. They were uninvested trainee knights. Starting tomorrow, senior knights would be responsible for their training, so they had better show respect. The first training exercise today was jumping through a ring of fire, and Charlotte was chosen to go first, for her sister's sake. She told herself she was a genius and could definitely do it. The result was that she caught fire instantly. On Raphael's side, no one had found any information about someone named Sasha. Unlike the previous assassins, there was no killing intent in her swordsmanship, so he believed there might still be room to turn her. But in truth, no one knew what was suspicious about her. Raphael intended to keep a close eye on Charlotte until he uncovered her true identity. The solemn lesson meant to prepare them to become senior knights finally ended before lunch. Jumping through rings of fire, sticking your head in a crocodile's mouth. Was this a circus or a knight order? Once she became a senior knight subordinate, she would train directly under them. Maybe that would be much better. She had already decided to endure this place until autumn. All she could do was pray to be assigned to a decent person. Raphael cheerfully said they were meeting again. Charlotte was speechless. Why did her superior have to be the Grand Duke himself? He was apparently considering how to punish her rudeness during the examination. Charlotte said it was all a misunderstanding, but his gaze was terrifying. Raphael asked her a series of questions, including whether she knew the Albrecht family. They had looked close. Charlotte hurriedly denied it, saying they were not familiar. She claimed to be a commoner and said she would never dare befriend nobles. Raphael stepped closer, suspicious. If she were truly a commoner, he thought, then her skin was far too fine. He asked what her real identity was. Charlotte had no choice but to change the subject, putting on an adorably coy act as she asked whether her skin really was that delicate. Raphael, unable to stand it, flung her hand aside and told her not to talk in that tone. She had successfully diverted the topic, and the crisis was barely avoided. On his desk was an application for an investigation into the Western ancient ruins. Across the continent were several ancient ruins said to date back to a time before the dynastic era. They were sealed by ancient magic. The magic at the entrance would summon ancient monsters whenever it detected intruders. Since the dynastic era, no one had been able to break the seal. Who would be able to unlock this ancient miracle was a subject of great interest across the continent. In the latter half of the original story, the largest of them, the Western ancient ruins, was forcibly developed by the Emperor. The magic trap detected intruders, and Ethan lost his life during that mission. But that had happened after Grace's marriage. Why they started investigating it so early? She found it strange. Raphael also noticed Charlotte's gaze. Was she interested in the Western ruins? With her around, things really did become interesting. Then let him wait and see. Charlotte felt that he was standing far too close. Someone came in and could not help interrupting them. Charlotte thought the timing was perfect and wanted to excuse herself, but he picked her up and told her to stay and listen. Charlotte struggled violently, but it was useless. He said it was an order from her superior. The visitor wanted Charlotte to withdraw, but the Grand Duke insisted on his decision. He said he liked this person far too much. If she was not by his side, he could not concentrate. Seeing through the Grand Duke's intention, Charlotte decided to play along and immediately brought out her flawless acting. She said that in her eyes there was only the Grand Duke. Her sparkling gaze nearly overwhelmed him. She had no idea what the Grand Duke was really thinking, but if she played her role well enough, he might trust her. Then she could wait for Ethan. Seeing the scene, the visitor believed the rumors were true, that he liked men, and handed over a letter from the Emperor. He was ordered to confirm its contents and carry them out immediately. The Grand Duke's expression changed. It said only this: depart for the West at once. No refusal permitted. Not even a word of greeting. That was the entire message. It did not look at all like something written to a real nephew. The messenger also brought a recording crystal. The Emperor said he looked forward to major results from the investigation of those ruins. Everyone knew that although the emperor had lost his parents early in life, he doted on his nephew. And that nephew had grown into an outstanding man. When his nephew returned victorious from war, the emperor had publicly honored him in the central square of the capital, making the entire empire feel how much favor he bestowed upon his nephew. Yet now he was sending that same nephew back to the West. That letter and the recorded image both conveyed the emperor's cold and forceful attitude, as if he were using a merciless command to push his nephew back into danger. Could it be that the emperor did not actually cherish the Grand Duke? Or is this a test? If the Grand Duke refused the order, the emperor would suspect his loyalty. But if he accepted it, he would have no excuse to avoid the expedition. No matter which choice he made, the Grand Duke was at a disadvantage. Just like her sister, seeing that the messenger was about to report to His Majesty that the Grand Duke had agreed to go west, Charlotte suddenly interrupted and said she had just remembered something. His Majesty's birthday was approaching. She decided to help him for once. Surely there must be many things that needed handling. She hinted for the Grand Duke to follow her lead. Judging from those words, the Emperor probably did not actually intend to send the Grand Duke west immediately. Such a forceful command suggested he might be testing the Grand Duke's obedience. The best method was to divert the Emperor's attention, especially now, with rumors spreading that the Grand Duke had fallen for a man. If it also spread that he was refusing the expedition because he was too infatuated with his subordinate, not only would the Emperor's suspicions be eased, his interest in the expedition would gradually fade as well. The Grand Duke followed Charlotte's lead and said he would personally explain his decision to His Majesty. As the messenger could see, he was a bit busy at the moment. The man left in discomfort. Charlotte was utterly speechless. He really was good at acting. At the same time, she was shocked. Was there some additional setting she had never known about? Then the Grand Duke suddenly turned, picked up his sword, and said her identity was highly suspicious. Her speech carried a noble accent. He asked again who she really was. Charlotte could not keep hiding it. She felt that this time she might truly die, so she could only say that the reason she had entered this place was because there was someone she wanted to protect, but she could not tell him who that person was. That person was very important to her, that she absolutely was not His Highness's enemy. She only wanted him to trust her. For once, he listened. He glanced at the letter on the desk and brought up what she had done just now. Was it done to win his favor? Charlotte explained that it was not. She had only done it because he looked exhausted. Of course, what Charlotte felt was not pity but concern. He told her not to interfere anymore and stop there. But Charlotte disliked the way he spoke. He always reminded her of Grace. So she said that he could ask others for help. After all, he was human too, an ordinary person. The Grand Duke was only surprised for a moment before saying that she had started lecturing him now. Then he rang the bell and ordered her to clean the crocodile pen. Charlotte nearly exploded. His Highness was simply too much. No matter how she looked at it, Charlotte still felt strange to him. As for the letter, the Emperor was very skilled at manipulating appearances. That was why an unfit person could become emperor. Even if the emperor sent his underage nephew to the battlefield before his coming-of-age ceremony, no one would question whether he loved his nephew. Though he disliked receiving help from someone whose identity he could not confirm without her interference, he would have been sent on another expedition by the emperor again. He thought Charlotte was an arrogant, rude little thing. Since he still could not confirm who she was, he had no choice but to keep her by his side. Meanwhile, Charlotte was cleaning the crocodile pool. It was training time now, so no one would be here. She needed a bath immediately. She could not stand the smell any longer. Normally, she would wait until everyone was asleep, then sneak in to use the night's luxurious private bath. Sometimes things were not all bad. It felt incredible. It had been a long time since she had bathed this carefree. She really wished every day could be like this. Who would have thought that at a time like this, someone would actually come in? Charlotte hurriedly hid herself. The urgent thing now was to get out before being discovered. But in the blink of an eye, the person had vanished. Who knew he would appear soundlessly behind her? He said outsiders could not enter this place. Was she a spy? He was absurdly strong, and Charlotte could not break free. There were no female knights in the Grand Duke's residence. He demanded to know her identity. The instant he let his guard down, Charlotte seized the chance and slammed him into the water. She wanted to see how much water he could swallow. Then she fled in the chaos. She had not expected anyone else to come in. Was training already over? Someone noticed movement over there. Someone suspected it was him. There was nowhere to hide. If she were discovered here, she was finished. Charlotte panicked. She thought she could not just get thrown out like this. Then Sir Idris stepped out from there. He said, "You're awfully noisy." The moment she heard his name, Charlotte froze in shock. In the past, he had served at the temple as a holy knight. Now he was the vice commander of the Black Dragon Knights. With his outstanding strength and elegant manner, he was the idol of the knights. There were even rumors that he was the Grand Duke's lover. Once they realized it was him, they decided to come back later and politely asked him to enjoy his bath first. Then they hurried out. Charlotte quickly changed clothes, insisting she was not suspicious. However, he immediately recognized her as Miss Charlotte. Since he already knew her identity, she could not come up with another excuse. While Charlotte worried she would be expelled, he said they should talk about the details somewhere else. This was his room. He began asking why she had come here. Charlotte did not know how to answer, but after discovering she had violated military regulations, why was he still giving her a chance to explain? He said that a few years ago, at a swordsmanship tournament, he had seen her fight, and her swordsmanship had left a deep impression on him. Charlotte wondered how Sir Idris knew her. So it turned out he had seen her in a tournament. For a time, she had entered many such competitions. At the same time, he had one question. What reason had driven her to enter the Black Dragon Knights? That would determine her punishment. Charlotte felt she could trust him, so she told him the truth. But he thought it was not worth taking such a risk. Her reason, risking damage to family relations for this, struck him as somewhat childish. Charlotte had no way to argue with what he said, but to her, nothing mattered more than her sister's happiness. The only reason she had ever taken up the sword was for Grace, so she was already prepared to give everything. He said Ethan would return in 2 months. That meant that until then, he would keep watch over her. He hoped Charlotte would keep as low a profile as possible. She sincerely thanked him. Sir Idris had confirmed her identity, and because he was Ethan's direct superior, with that connection, he could get Ethan back sooner. He could also send her away at any time. Yet he even allowed her to use a private bath and helped her send Joan a letter she had written. Charlotte did not know why he was helping her. Perhaps her final words had moved Idris. Training grew harsher and harsher. They barely had the strength to lift a spoon. When Aaron saw her spill soup, he ordered them to relearn proper table manners. After eating, they were to gather at the castle gate, not the training grounds. A distinguished guest was coming, so they were to change into uniform and be outside in an hour. Outsiders were strictly forbidden here, yet they were actually going to welcome guests. Then came that voice. Raphael stepped forward to receive them. It was Princess Cordelia Cardines. The eldest princess of the Cardines Empire, Princess Cordelia, had been the judge at the very first swordsmanship tournament Charlotte entered. At the time, along with the Black Dragon Knights and the Albrecht Marquis Knight Order, she had founded the Soaring Swan Knights, making them one of the Empire's 3 great knight orders. Princess Cordelia had noticed Charlotte back then. After Charlotte won the tournament, the princess had personally tried to recruit her, but Charlotte had had no intention of leaving the Brabant family at the time, so she had politely declined. Cordelia still cared for her like a younger sister, and Charlotte had gradually grown fond of her bold and generous nature. Before long, she had even introduced Cordelia to Grace. Their family had always had a good relationship with her, and they had become allies with shared ideals. If Charlotte's true identity were exposed in front of the Grand Duke and everyone else, it would be a complete disaster. No matter what, she had to maintain her disguise. She might look ridiculous, but she did not care. Raphael walked over and said that only senior knights were allowed to wear helmets. Take it off and stop causing confusion. No matter what, she had to wait until Princess Cordelia passed before removing it, so she could only beg him with her eyes. Then the 4th princess of the Cardines Empire, Princess Nydia Cardines, heard the commotion and walked over. She had heard that the princess had been frail since childhood and had always had to remain in the palace. This was also Charlotte's first time seeing her face from such close range. Thanks to that, she successfully avoided the crisis. Seeing Charlotte smile at her, Nydia grew a little shy. Whatever their purpose in coming was, everyone's attention had shifted elsewhere. It seemed today's training might finally be over. But Aaron said that while the princesses stayed at the estate, they needed to remain with their direct superiors and carry out security duties. The next day, after morning training at the Grand Duke's residence, she would have to act together with her superior. She did not want to go. The princess's sudden visit was to deliver the emperor's verbal decree concerning the emperor's birthday banquet. The western investigation had been replaced. Instead of going west, the Grand Duke was now to prepare a birthday gift that would satisfy the emperor. The Grand Duke's expression was grim. Charlotte was gradually beginning to adapt to working beside the Grand Duke. So things were not too terrible, but she was truly worried about running into Princess Cordelia while beside him. Cordelia was surely in the office now. Yesterday, the princesses had arrived at the ducal residence, delivered the emperor's oral command, and then gone to rest. Today, the Grand Duke had told Princess Cordelia that he had something important to say. There was a very high chance they were together now. She could not stay away from her direct superior for too long. The only thing she could do was delay as much as possible. At this point, she would rather be training. If she tried too hard to cover her face, she would look even more suspicious. Was there any good way out of this? Then she suddenly noticed sounds coming from afar. She hoped it was Princess Cordelia. Instead, it was the fourth princess. In such a remote place, and without anyone escorting her, it was dangerous. Then she thought she might be overthinking things. The guard knights were surely hiding somewhere nearby. Who knew that a person would suddenly spring out from behind the bushes? Charlotte rushed over instantly and stood in front of the princess, asking whether she was all right. The assassin was not frightened of her at all. He did not think much of a trainee knight. Charlotte told the princess to step back and wait a moment. He had greatly underestimated a black dragon knight. Whoever wanted to assassinate the princess in broad daylight would certainly die if they were caught here in the Grand Duke's residence. Soon Valen and the others arrived. Charlotte had already subdued the man. The princess looked badly shaken. Charlotte walked over and told her that she had already dealt with the assassin, so she could relax. Seeing the blood on Charlotte's hand, she thought the princess might be frightened. Just as she was about to apologize for her recklessness, the princess took her hand, thinking she had been injured, and wrapped the wound for her. Charlotte had just begun to say thank you when Raphael arrived and told her to stop spreading misery around. The princess looked up. Raphael's brow furrowed slightly. Princess Cordelia came over, worried whether her younger sister had been hurt, and paid no attention to what was happening here. Charlotte had intended to muddle through, but Princess Nydia brought her up, saying that Charlotte had saved her. Charlotte had herself wrapped up tightly from head to toe, terrified that Cordelia might notice and recognize her. Fortunately, Cordelia did not. She only asked whether Charlotte was hurt. A guard quietly came over and told Raphael that they were ready to interrogate the assassin who had tried to kill the princess. He then turned and ordered Charlotte to go to the infirmary. That night, the report on the failed assassination attempt against the princess came in. He had never imagined the emperor would use his own child like this. The assassin was one of the fourth princess's guards. His true identity was that of a secret soldier loyal only to the emperor. The emperor had sent his own knight to assassinate the fourth princess and frame Raphael in order to shake his position. And as if by fate, it was Sasha who had stopped the assassin. Was this, too, merely coincidence? Or had she been watching all along to ease his suspicions? That foolishly smiling face of hers. Even if he only thought her a strange person, he still could not determine her identity. But her extraordinary strength had left a deep impression. No matter what, he would investigate the truth. The next day at the training grounds, everyone was excited. Only after asking did Charlotte learn that they had suppressed news of the assassination attempt on the fourth princess. Sir Idris came over and cut off their chatter. Today he would supervise training. Charlotte more or less understood that there were powerful figures behind this affair, far beyond the reach of people like them. If that coincidence had not occurred, if the princess really had been assassinated, then the one most likely to benefit from it would have been the emperor. Charlotte realized that too. If he used his own daughter to force the Grand Duke onto an expedition, his plan would have succeeded. She had promised Sir Idris to keep a low profile, and then trouble still broke out. She even worried that perhaps she had acted too conspicuously. But now it seemed stepping in had been the right thing. Sir Idris turned to Charlotte and said the Grand Duke had ordered her to report to the office. Once she arrived, the Grand Duke told her clean. Charlotte was stunned. He was making her clean that enormous office all by herself. She firmly objected, but still started cleaning. She had thought there would be some important matter to discuss. It turned out to be nothing but housework. She almost wanted to go home. Raphael suddenly leaned in and asked about yesterday. The road from the training grounds to the office did not require passing through the garden. So why had she lingered in the garden instead of coming straight to him? At that moment, Charlotte really wanted to cry. How was she supposed to answer that she had not wanted to go near Princess Cordelia? Seeing that she did not answer, he had already guessed what she was thinking, a ploy to win the princess's favor. He told her to confess honestly. The truth was not nearly as serious as he imagined, but he still seemed suspicious. It looked like she would have to use that excuse again. She said someone had asked her to pick flowers for him, and that person was Idris. Charlotte dumped the blame on his head. He looked at her with suspicion, but his expression eased a little. He said that from now on, wherever she went, she had to report it to him. He wanted to know where his Sasha was and what she was doing. Meddling in a lover's relationship was bound to cause trouble. Though the original story had not described it in detail, Charlotte knew the Grand Duke and Idris were very close. This was common knowledge in society. Before, when Idris had pretended to be the Grand Duke's lover, the Baron had said nothing. Raphael stood and said that the princesses would return to the palace tomorrow morning. If Charlotte truly wanted to win their favor, then she had no time left. Charlotte looked somewhat saddened. If not for the current circumstances, they could have met and chatted as usual. Raphael's expression darkened. Was she really that upset? Charlotte thought he was simply worried. After all, she was handsome and highly skilled with a sword. With talent like hers, he must be afraid she would be stolen away. Charlotte sank into profound self-admiration. Raphael remained expressionless and asked whether she wanted to redecorate the entire office. In fact, an hour earlier, the princesses had been preparing to leave. Before leaving, the fourth princess had wanted to see that night one more time and properly thank her. Charlotte seemed to have completely won the fourth princess's heart, but Raphael had refused directly. He said it was impossible. The reason was confidential and could not be told to her. Thinking back, his reaction had been a little excessive. It had been an entirely reasonable request. Why had he refused the princess's visit? A few days later, Charlotte had once again adapted to life as Sasha. While she was training, the Grand Duke ordered her to come to the reception room. When Charlotte arrived, she discovered that Sir Idris was already there. Charlotte had just sat down when he said there was already a reply to the telegram he had wanted to pass on to Albrecht. Just to be safe, he had also checked the contents again. That much Charlotte could understand. Once she got out of here, she would definitely have to hug him. Sir Idris brought up the matter of her dumping the blame on him. She really was hard to work with. He could understand that too. Charlotte had acted that way to avoid meeting Princess Cardines. And in the end, Charlotte used his knowledge of her situation to clear her name. The two of them started talking about bathing, and just then Raphael came in. How was he supposed to know their relationship had already reached the point where they could enter each other's rooms? Charlotte was terrified that he might have heard something. She said she had not expected him to come. But all Raphael cared about now was why Charlotte had gone into Sir Idris's room. Idris only said it was a private matter, which made Raphael even more irritated. Meanwhile, Charlotte watched the two of them and felt they looked perfect together, wearing a rather sly grin. Since they were arguing, because of her, she decided she had to take responsibility for the sake of their relationship and voluntarily took the blame. She changed her story and said she had no choice but to approach the Grand Duke. So she had no choice but to ask Sir Idris for help. Sir Idris went along with it and admitted fault as well, saying it would not happen again. After Charlotte stubbornly kept at it, Raphael finally believed them. He said he trusted Sir Idris. As soon as that matter was settled, Raphael said that for this inspection, both she and Sir Idris had to accompany the Grand Duke. They were heading to the prosperous district nearby today to inspect the Merchants Guild. The Grand Duke always moved with a small group, including Sir Idris. Since it was such a good chance to go out and have fun, Charlotte suggested getting something to eat together. But Idris said they would eat with the others after the inspection was over. It seemed the Grand Duke really was quite mysterious. He had brought her along, yet had not told her to stay close to him. Still, she should be grateful that she had been placed in the same group as Idris. Not far away, Charlotte suddenly heard a familiar voice. It was her instructor. She could not believe he was here. She quickly hid behind Sir Idris. Understanding that Charlotte had run into someone she knew, he shielded her. Her instructor passed by them, simply taking them for a couple. Charlotte was a little shaken, but thanks to him, she had narrowly escaped disaster. But her legs went weak, and she accidentally fell against Raphael. Raphael appeared out of nowhere and asked what they were doing. Weren't they supposed to be inspecting the area? The misunderstanding had really gotten worse. Charlotte stood up to explain, but his expression darkened, and he told her to follow him without another word. The meeting room of the Biden Merchant Guild was much bigger than Charlotte had expected. The discussion was about a gift for the Emperor's birthday. The Emperor had demanded that the Grand Duke prove his loyalty at this year's birthday banquet, so this meeting had been called to find a solution. The Emperor had given the Grand Duke 3 choices. First, the Grand Duke could swear loyalty to the Emperor in front of everyone. Second, he could hand over the iron mine in the northern part of the Grand Duchy. Third, he could give up the recently discovered red diamond mine. The first option was clearly meant to force the Grand Duke into complete submission to the Emperor, so there was no way he would choose it. The iron mine was vital to the supply of the Night Order. The red diamond mine had enormous potential value because of how rare it was. From the Grand Duke's perspective, it was hard to choose between the two. In truth, Charlotte already had an answer, but it was awkward for her to speak up in a situation like this. The Grand Duke, meanwhile, found it rather strange. She had been unusually quiet all day. He had always suspected Charlotte was a spy sent by the Emperor, so he was conflicted. He still had not found any proof that she was a spy, and the meeting still had not produced any solution. This was the first time Charlotte had seen the Grand Duke thinking so deeply. After going back and forth in her mind, she finally decided to speak. "Your Grace, hand over the red diamond mine." The moment she opened her mouth, an uproar broke out. The opposition was even stronger than she had expected. Raphael told everyone to be quiet and let Charlotte continue. Charlotte took out a pouch and said, he had to give up the red diamonds, because before long, red diamonds would become as common as pebbles on the roadside. She said these red diamonds were payments she had received while working as a mercenary for a merchant from the Far East at a port in the eastern part of the continent. In that great mining region, a huge quantity of red diamonds had suddenly been discovered. First, there was the temperature. Second, there was a species of red six-legged insect that lived on the eastern continent. Red diamonds were formed from that insect's droppings, which mixed with the surrounding soil and crystallized under sunlight. If this kind of gem could be mined in the Grand Duchy, then it was very likely that warm air currents from the eastern continent had carried the six-legged insects here, where they settled. Some people thought that sounded ridiculous, but it was not a lie. They would know if they conducted an experiment. It was a good idea, but there was one thing he could not understand. How had this person managed to produce those red diamonds at exactly the right moment, as if she had been prepared in advance? She had anticipated long ago that something like this might happen with the red gemstone. She had obtained the diamonds from Joan and planned to use them to help the Grand Duke at the right moment. It just so happened that this moment had come now. Even she herself thought it seemed suspicious. But if she did nothing now, the Grand Duke might make the wrong choice. When she thought about how this absurd decision could affect Ethan and her sister's future, she decided to speak boldly. She said she had carried those diamonds to make life in the military a little easier, and perhaps also to please the Grand Duke. Charlotte's half-truth, half-fabrication was accepted just like that. The meeting was postponed for a week. In addition, a small team was organized, including her, to verify the truth. A research site was established, and by the 7th day after the experiment began, even those who had completely doubted her had changed their minds. He found it hard to believe. This should solve the matter of the gift for the Emperor, and she should be able to clear herself of suspicion too. He sincerely apologized to Charlotte. Charlotte was generous and forgave him right away, which moved him deeply. But then, to everyone's surprise, he turned to the Grand Duke and said he wanted to resign from his current post. His stubbornness seemed to have caused damage. If something like this happened again, he might end up hurting someone who truly served his grace with sincere loyalty. He no longer had the face to remain by his side. As one of the very few people closest to the Grand Duke, Morris had always supported his grace and the Black Dragon Knights. Charlotte could not bear the thought of his resignation provoking the Grand Duke's anger, so she hurriedly tried to dissuade him. Charlotte told him not to lose heart. Everyone should work together and be loyal to his grace. If someone made a mistake, they just had to correct it. Her words even left the Grand Duke stunned. The two of them turned to ask his opinion, only to find that his expression looked frightening, as if he were angry. Then the two started bickering again. In a corner they could not see, the Grand Duke smiled faintly. It was the first time he had ever heard words like that. She truly was a strange one. 1 month later, on the day of the emperor's birthday banquet, he had already prepared the documents regarding the mine. If not for that girl, they would have suffered heavy losses. By the day the news spread across the market, if they had not investigated how widely red diamonds had already been distributed among inland jewelers, their losses would have been severe. It was only a matter of time before red diamonds lost their value. He still had some preparations to make. Just a few minutes ago, Charlotte had still been training, and now it had turned into this. Even if she was one of the Grand Duke's subordinates, what was she supposed to do if she ran into someone she knew at the Emperor's banquet? Rewarding her for solving a problem in this way was too much. She was so uneasy she could barely sit still, but he himself looked perfectly at ease. Charlotte did not want to go, but he insisted on taking her with him, and as his partner, no less. Since his relationship with the Emperor was poor, and Sir Idris had been left behind to guard the Black Dragon Knights, he had brought her instead. They had even picked formal clothes for her. Charlotte thought the whole thing looked terrible after seeing them. Still, thankfully there was a mask. Grand Duke Ludovica entered with his partner. The outfit Romeo had prepared, and the hastily prepared mask only made her feel unbearably awkward. Even as Charlotte, she had rarely attended banquets. She had never imagined that entering as the Grand Duke's partner would draw so much attention. Even her sister was there. The moment she entered, there was already trouble. Seeing her look around, the Grand Duke thought she was frightened. He soothed her by saying that no one here would dare look down on his partner, so she did not need to shrink back. He thought she was nervous because she was surrounded by nobles, so she simply went along with what he said. Even so, Charlotte was still very tense. She only hoped the banquet would end quickly. Before she knew it, the two of them had gone through quite a lot together. She had already grown used to the identity of being the Grand Duke's partner. Meanwhile, neither of them noticed the Emperor upstairs, watching them. By the end, Charlotte was exhausted. She really wanted it all to end soon. The Grand Duke patted her on the head and said she had worked hard. Once he had met His Majesty, they would leave. Charlotte was left standing there, blushing a little. She went to her room to rest. Avoiding familiar faces had already worn her out, but just seeing her sister had already been enough for her. Then something suddenly happened outside the window. Meanwhile, the Grand Duke was on his way back. Romeo was furious. He wanted the mine, and now he was pretending to refuse just to stall for time. It disgusted him. After hearing that, the Grand Duke told him to stop talking. They were leaving, but when he returned to the room, it was covered in blood. He could not believe the sight before him. Someone had broken into the room, and there were signs of a hasty escape before things had even been put back in order. That meant Sasha, who had been in the room, might have met with disaster as well. Romeo also noticed that Sasha's sword was still in the room. His eyes changed. Someone had touched his things. Outside, Charlotte was beating up an assassin. She was one of the Grand Duke's trusted people. That fool had rushed at her without even knowing who she was. Charlotte told him to repent before the Grand Duke. She had not expected the Grand Duke to come looking for her, just as Charlotte was about to run over and claim credit. The Grand Duke's concern was fixed on her injured palm. It was just an old wound that had split open again, yet he wore that expression. The assassin at the side clicked his tongue disdainfully. No one expected the Grand Duke to kick him right in the face. Charlotte had worked hard to leave him alive. He could not die just like that. From the beginning, the Grand Duke had spoken only in concern for Charlotte. He even wanted Charlotte to take off her clothes so he could check her injuries. While the two were arguing over it, unexpectedly, the fourth princess asked what they were doing. In Princess Cordelia Cardine's room at the Imperial Palace, fate brought them together again. She had been wanting to properly thank Charlotte, but she also found her rather strange. Even indoors, Charlotte was wearing a mask. Her explanation was that she feared her ugly appearance might offend the princesses. The moment she encountered the fourth princess, she had hastily put on the mask just in case. She had not expected him to come too. The matter of the assassin still needed to be handled. Charlotte had thought she would be able to leave quickly, but the Grand Duke accepted the princess's invitation and even brought Charlotte along. The princess expressed her thanks to Charlotte, and Charlotte quickly said it was nothing. Right now, she only wanted to get out of there. Princess Cardine's eyes lit up. Charlotte had not done it for reward, nor asked for anything in return. The princess was pleased by her humility and wanted to grant her a title in the name of the imperial family, make her a true knight, and have her join her knight order. She asked what Charlotte thought of that intention. Charlotte was shocked, while the Grand Duke was slightly annoyed. What did the princess mean, poaching someone right in front of him? The princess replied without concern that Charlotte was still only a knight apprentice. If she came to her side, she would be able to make full use of her talents. Charlotte understood that the princess wanted to recruit her, but she had a hidden identity, and if she joined, her plan to meet Ethan would fall apart as well. This was the highest title Charlotte could reasonably hope to receive, and she could become a true knight too. Refusing would only make things seem stranger. Yet she still said that line. It was one of Knight Ethan's famous lines from the latter half of the original story. Not only did it express loyalty, it was also an iconic line. Princess Cardines did not persist and soon let it go. Charlotte was finally able to accept that the matter of being forced into another knight order had been resolved, and she at last breathed a sigh of relief. Yet the Grand Duke still said she only ever caused trouble. As they were about to take their leave, the princess reminded him that the pressure his father was placing on him had been growing stronger lately. Princess Cardines sincerely hoped he would stand on her side, but the Grand Duke answered that he would stand on no one's side. Everyone wanted more from him, and he was tired of it. After he came out, he found Charlotte waiting for him outside. Just now, the reason she had refused was that she wanted to stay by the Grand Duke's side. That pleased him considerably. Bringing her to the banquet this time had not been a bad choice for him. A few days later, a letter lay on a table at the Brabant estate. It spoke of missing her sister and of the things that had happened recently. It even mentioned how someone had laughed at her for having milk on her lips while eating. Upon receiving the letter, Miss Grace smiled. It seemed Charlotte was having a wonderful time in the South. The butler wondered whether they should call the young lady back, since it was time to discuss the engagement. But Grace said not yet. Ever since supporting Princess Cordelia, the pressure on her had only grown greater. The engagement was merely one part of it. Duke Herman, who would become the emperor's father-in-law and control the political situation, was isolating Princess Cordelia in order to make the first prince emperor. One of the ways he was isolating the princess was through an engagement with the Brabant family, her strongest supporters. From top to bottom, the Brabant family had quickly begun to feel the pressure coming from Duke Herman. She had no other choice. She only hoped Sasha would not find out about this mess and would come home later. That way, Sasha could smile without worry for just one more day. Before they knew it, summer had arrived. Charlotte helplessly trudged on foot for an entire day, and now she had to pitch a tent right away. The training load was intense. This training site was near the Grand Duke's residence. Exceptionally, even the commander class had taken part. They were conducting one-on-one training sessions. Because her own superior, the Grand Duke, was busy, she would be training with Sir Idris. Before training began, he told Charlotte to go bathe first. At a time like this, he would not let anyone come near. Naturally, that was exactly what Charlotte wanted. Just as she was about to take her clothes, a surge of air blew past beside her. It was the Grand Duke himself. Charlotte was stunned. Such immense mana. In this world, mana was an invisible force of nature. Only those who had endured great suffering could eventually master it. Among them, those who could even control mana in nature itself were called sword masters. The man who turned his own heart into a conduit for mana was the Grand Duke. With an unfriendly expression, he apologized to Charlotte. It looked like she had been startled, and he thought she needed more training. He told Idris to go back first. He himself would teach Charlotte. Unexpectedly, the atmosphere between the two men became strange. The two of them actually started arguing over who would teach her. The tension instantly rose. Charlotte seriously suspected the Grand Duke was jealous of the Marquis, so she said she wanted to receive instruction from the Grand Duke as well. After Idris left, only the two of them remained. Charlotte asked him to continue teaching her. Not long before, he had heard quite a commotion outside, and only then learned that the noise had come from the apprentice knights' training grounds. From a distance, he had seen Charlotte training. Whenever that fellow got involved, she always ended up doing something pointless. The thought of how close the two of them seemed made him irritable. He took Charlotte away. The moment he took off his clothes, Charlotte hurriedly shut her eyes. It had all happened far too suddenly. He wanted to bathe first. He told Charlotte to stay nearby. Standing behind him, Charlotte saw that his body was covered in scars. They did not look like the marks left by war, but more like the aftermath of torture. Charlotte suspected they had been caused by his efforts to regain power. Looking at those wounds, she asked whether it had hurt terribly, since they must have left such deep memories behind. The Grand Duke told her to come closer, then splashed water all over her face. As a result, Charlotte lost her footing and fell straight into his bath. The Grand Duke said coldly that he did not need anyone to help him bathe. Charlotte hurriedly scrambled out. Both of them felt awkward. The next next day, Charlotte had not slept all night because of what had happened. When she learned that today's instructor would be Idris, she was delighted. After all, what had happened yesterday made facing the Grand Duke again too embarrassing. Seeing that Charlotte looked listless, he said he had good news for her. Ethan's return had been moved up. Charlotte was overjoyed. At last, she could breathe again. The first thing she would do after seeing Ethan was ask him to persuade her sister. He would go find Grace immediately. If that happened, and Grace canceled the wedding after Ethan persuaded her, then Charlotte's mission would be complete. Her sister always put Charlotte and the family first, so if she had accepted the marriage, there had to be a reason. Idris asked what she planned to do afterward. She said she would return to Brabant. Idris suggested that she should run away on the road back. Once she reached the Grand Duke's residence, it would be much harder. But Charlotte worried that it would cause trouble for him. Idris said it was fine. After someone came looking for her later, several months would pass, and members would not be allowed to leave the order. Security would become stricter too. Of course, he was only joking. When the time came, he would authorize her departure. Charlotte asked why he was helping her. He only said it was on a whim. This would be their last training session, so he wanted to teach her a few things. By the end, Charlotte was utterly exhausted. She had never expected it to be this intense. Tomorrow, she would definitely be Sir all over. She was so tired that she did not even notice when the Grand Duke sat down beside her. Romeo only thought she was overreacting. Seeing Charlotte eat, the Grand Duke remarked that since she only ate vegetables, no wonder she was so light. The moment Charlotte thought of yesterday again, she could hardly stand it. She thought she would leave as soon as she finished eating, but suddenly the ground outside shook. It was a landslide. They all hid beneath the table. Once the shaking stopped, she crawled out. It seemed the western road had collapsed because of the landslide. There were no injuries, but the knights returning from the west would have to take a detour and would be delayed by a week. There was no help for it. They had to clear the area immediately. Looking at the pile of rocks before her, Charlotte had no idea when the work would be finished. But when she thought about Ethan coming from the other side, her motivation returned. While Charlotte was working, she overheard two men gossiping nearby, speaking ill of Ethan. They even said Ethan shamelessly clung to a noblewoman, and that the Brabant family was pitiful. Charlotte immediately swung her hoe at them and demanded an apology. The two were extremely dismissive. Why should they apologize? Even if he was a commoner, Ethan was still a high-ranking knight. He had even promoted one of them and was their superior. They even thought Charlotte had been seduced by Ethan. The two sides were about to start fighting when the Grand Duke unexpectedly appeared. He asked what was going on. The two men saluted him. Charlotte did not want him to see her like this. She had just been about to draw her sword. After hearing what happened, the Grand Duke ordered Charlotte alone to remain behind and clear the rocks. Charlotte wanted to say something, but his icy stare frightened her into silence. It was the first time she had seen such a cold expression on his face, even though defying a superior was wrong. They had insulted Ethan too, and he was also their superior. Why was she the only one being punished? Her heart filled with resentment. She had only wanted to see Ethan and tell him about Grace's plight, yet without noticing it, she had already gone through so much and grown used to this life. But just then, she overheard what sounded like mention of Ethan. Idris said Ethan would arrive at the training grounds tomorrow. Since they would not be far apart, she could actually go find him, though the very fact that the two of them meeting was a problem. Once the thought came, she acted immediately. She climbed over and went to find Ethan, while the Grand Duke, from a distance, watched it all. Earlier, he had heard rumors lately about that fellow around the Grand Duke. Romeo had warned him to pay attention. He wanted to see exactly what Charlotte was going to do. He had not expected himself to react so strongly to the name Ethan. Was that Sasha's true face? He decided to follow Charlotte. That way, he would learn the answers to all his questions. Charlotte had finally found the place. According to what she remembered of Ethan, he should be scouting here rather than staying at the main camp. She was a little nervous and did not know what she would say once they truly met. Unlike Grace's sternness, would he be gentler? Before she realized it, a sword was already at her neck. Ethan stood behind her and sternly demanded to know who she was. He told her to turn around. The moment he saw Charlotte's face, he was shocked. He recognized her at a glance. He stepped forward and asked how she had gotten here, why her face was filthy, and why her hair was shorter. At last, she had found him. Charlotte was so moved that she could not speak. The journey had simply been too exhausting. He comforted her, saying she was safe now. Her resolve collapsed, and tears streamed down her face. The Grand Duke had followed her all the way there. He wondered what exactly she had been thinking. So much had happened to Sasha during this time. Charlotte wanted Ethan to return to Brabant with her. Grace needed him. She would not let Grace marry Duke Herman. The engagement would only be announced after the Harvest Festival, so there was still time, as long as he could persuade Grace. But after hearing her out, Ethan refused. He said that this engagement was what Grace wanted. Charlotte grew angry when she heard that. Was he telling her to just watch while her sister became unhappy? Judging from his reaction, Charlotte knew there had to be more to this engagement than she realized. As a member of the Brabant family, she wanted to protect both her sister and her family. Ethan was deeply gratified to hear that. Her eyes were so resolute. Then he began to explain. They did not want the eldest princess to hold military power alone. Because His Grace the Grand Duke remained neutral in the matter of imperial succession, they wanted to use Brabant to prevent Marquis Albrecht from supporting the eldest princess. For Grace, who had become head of the household at such a young age, there was no way she could refuse such a proposal. They wanted to use her sister to balance military power. She was trying to turn this crisis into an opportunity to report the first prince's movements. To the eldest princess, Grace was not the type to endure humiliation and compromise. She had not given up on finding the person truly capable of leading the empire forward. Charlotte asked whether, faced with such circumstances, he intended to give up on Grace. Then he explained why he had wanted to become a knight. Without wealth or power, he could not protect Grace. He wanted to become Grace's sword. He had joined the Knight Order for that same reason. To become the Count's guard, he needed a certain position. The Grand Duke would promote subordinates who earned merit quickly. No matter what, Ethan would protect Grace and never abandon her. Charlotte finally understood. So Ethan had gone on this expedition to gain the power needed to protect her sister. This was something she had never learned from a novel. And Grace had wanted to protect Charlotte by keeping her ignorant of the filthier side of noble society for her entire life. But Charlotte still wanted to help her sister, so she asked Ethan to go back and speak with Grace. She believed Grace would understand his feelings. After thinking for a moment, Charlotte said, "All right." Soon, Ethan heard some sort of movement. He said he had to go back now and told Charlotte to return as well. If she followed the small path ahead, she could avoid the knights. Then they would meet again in Brabant. Idris had helped her a great deal, so she had to thank him on Ethan's behalf. Now Charlotte should return to Brabant. She had already made up her mind about what she needed to do. She needed to have a proper talk with Grace, and she would make sure Ethan came back alive. For now, she had to return to her sister's side first. But then, because of the landslide, she nearly fell into a pit by accident. Fortunately, the Grand Duke appeared just in time and caught her. In the end, the branch supporting their weight gave way, and the two of them fell in. When Charlotte woke up again, the Grand Duke was still protecting her. Thankfully, he was not dead. Since he was a sword master, he should recover quickly, and perhaps this was also an opportunity. Maybe she could return to Brabant. Meanwhile, the others were searching for the Grand Duke and Sasha. The weather was turning bad. They had to find them as quickly as possible. But the landslide had buried every trace. Idris found Ethan and asked where they had gone. Where was the last place he had seen them? Meanwhile, Charlotte was helping bandage the Grand Duke. Ethan had used to bandage her like this before. This time, she was not sure whether she was doing it correctly. They had to return to the Grand Duke's residence and get treatment. She could not simply abandon the Grand Duke after he had been injured because of her. So she bandaged him before leaving. But why had the Grand Duke appeared there in the first place? He had probably been following her all along, starting from the training grounds. If that were true, then he might have seen her together with Ethan. Once he woke up, she would have to observe his expression carefully. Just then she noticed the bandage seemed loose, so she reached out to tighten it. She had not expected the Grand Duke to wake up right then and ask what she was doing. Taking liberties with someone while they were unconscious was hardly proper. Charlotte said she was simply treating him according to the most basic principles of decency. But the Grand Duke did not believe her at all. Now, they had to figure out how to get out. He looked around. It seemed that was their only possible way out. The cliff looked almost like a vertical slope. He did not think they could climb up it, and now it was raining above them. All they could do was hope Idris and Romeo would find them, and pray that the rainwater would not seep into the cliff and cause it to collapse. Earlier, the Grand Duke had awakened before Sasha. His shoulder was injured, and it would be very difficult to send an unconscious person up first. He had no choice but to wait for this troublesome person to wake. He was relieved that she herself was not hurt. He had fallen off the cliff to save her and ended up injured. Yet all he could think about was that she was safe. She had not only left the group without permission, but had also bewildered a high-ranking knight and even tried to run away. The whole thing felt absurd, and because of that, he missed the best moment to wake up. Her bandaging was awful, and when he heard her call out Brother Ethan, he roughly guessed that she was a woman. Then all her previous odd behavior suddenly made sense. She had disguised herself and entered the night order most likely just to meet that man. And she had once said there was someone she wanted to protect. Could that person be Ethan? The thought irritated him. Charlotte had one question she wanted to ask him. Why had he wanted to save her? The Grand Duke said it had just been a coincidence. He had never expected to run into a deserter there. Later, he would let everyone else see what became of deserters. Charlotte had only just thanked him for saving her life when she collapsed. The Grand Duke's eyes widened. It reminded him of that incident. What was wrong with her? She seemed to have a fever. If he had known things would turn out like this, he should have left earlier. This girl was making him remember that incident again. The longer this dragged on, the worse her condition would become. If this continued, he might truly regret it. Fortunately, Idris and the others found them. But when Idris called Charlotte's name, it irritated him. Soon the Grand Duke came out. Idris was worried about Sasha's injuries, but the Grand Duke said she was fine and would not even let him look. He would not allow him to take her away for treatment either. 3 years earlier, there had been a swordsmanship tournament here. It had been very noisy. A princess had told him to come over. Then he saw Sasha below. Her swordsmanship shocked him. The princess had wanted to show those knights, who knew only how to wave around boring sword techniques, that swordsmanship could be this joyful and free. He instructed his subordinates to gather the knights and told Ethan to return first. When the Grand Duke set Sasha down, a knight came over and said he had something to report. The Grand Duke's expression turned ugly. It seemed the apprentice knights had grown increasingly ignorant of boundaries these days. Though frightened, the knight still told him what he had seen that day. Not long after Sasha became an apprentice knight, he had seen her secretly bathing alone. He had followed her to take a look, but before he could finish speaking, a blade swept past his cheek. The Grand Duke told him he did not need to say any more. The knight was so frightened that he fled at once. Understanding that the Grand Duke already knew, he ran. 2 weeks had already passed since they returned from training. Ever since Charlotte collapsed from illness, training had to be suspended for her during that time. He received intelligence that the imperial family was purchasing flowers in large quantities. The summer festival was almost here. The imperial family bought flowers every year. That in itself was not unusual. The issue was that the flowers they had ordered were white lilies, the flower symbolizing a royal marriage. To her surprise, it involved the Grand Duke. Her uncle said it was confidential and that he had to leave first. Charlotte asked Ethan about it. In truth, the emperor was arranging a wedding between the Grand Duke and Olivia, the daughter of a marquis from one of the factions allied with the Herman family. Sasha said excitedly that the Grand Duke had said he had no interest in the succession struggle, so he ought to be able to refuse. But His Grace could not reject the Emperor's orders. One way or another, he had to comply. The Emperor held something the Grand Duke absolutely had to recover. As for what it was, Ethan could not say. He also did not want Sasha getting too deeply involved in imperial conflict. Before long, knights coming to the summer festival would stir up unrest, so they should plan how to escape. Because Charlotte had been injured during training, she had missed the previous chance to escape. But this time, Ethan would definitely send her home. The Grand Duke. His father was begging the person before him to spare him, but he would not kill him. On the contrary, he would return every year of submission he had endured under his hands to his dear nephew. Welcome the accession of the new emperor. Voices murmured all around. The young prince had been struck hard, unable even to recognize the one who had saved him. At last he had grown up. In a daze, he asked where his father's body was. The man said he could not remember, but if the prince kept obeying his orders as before, he would remember soon enough. The Grand Duke woke from the dream. Every summer, he had the same dream. They were forcing His Grace the Grand Duke to deal with the problems caused with the Southern Alliance by the construction of the Caligo Dam. It was truly too much. Some advised the Grand Duke to give up on the body. He had already done more than enough. He wanted to give up too, but that was his father. If he gave up without even personally putting things to rest one last time, how could he live with that? They were gathering information about the body, and one day they would find a lead. For now, they had to find a way to resolve the marriage alliance first. Today's meeting did not look promising, and there was also Sasha. She needed to return before the summer night festival. Every time Grace asked about Sasha, it put him in an awkward position. His Highness Adrian came over to greet her uncle. It had been a long time since they had seen each other. Although his father was in charge of his upbringing, Joan disliked him. Because he liked Sasha, he instead wanted to keep him in check. He inquired about Sasha's situation, an engagement between the old Duke and Miss Grace. The fact that his grandson liked Sasha was truly absurd. Hearing that she would return before the summer night festival, he was delighted. Just imagining a reunion with that young lady after so long set his heart racing. The summer night festival had begun. Why did Charlotte have to be stuck in the palace like this instead of enjoying it? Originally, she had planned to go home while the Grand Duke was at the palace. But the escape plan she had made with brother Ethan had fallen through. And what was with those strange conditions on going out? If she violated even one of them, she would be dead. Still, now that the Grand Duke was gone and no knight was watching her, wasn't this the perfect chance to run? She had just tried to slip away when a hat hit her on the head from above. Looking up, she saw that it was Her Highness the Princess. She felt terribly rude for what had just happened. When the princess learned Charlotte would not be attending the evening banquet, she seemed quite disappointed. Charlotte suspected the princess had no dance partner. Such a delicate princess, and she still had to worry about something like that. It was truly concerning. Charlotte promised that once she had earned a knightly title, she would definitely invite Her Highness to dance. The fourth princess was very happy to hear that. Then she said it might be better not to attend this banquet, after all. She had heard that many guests from the south had arrived recently, and the atmosphere in the palace was not very good. There seemed to be diplomatic problems. Judging from the bits of news she had heard within the inner palace, the situation did not look optimistic. On the last day of the summer night festival, when many people would be gathered together, Ethan would risk his life to present a remonstrance to the emperor. In the end, envoys and nobles alike would be moved by his actions and persuade the emperor to withdraw the plan to build the dam. It was admirable that he would step forward for the greater good, but precisely because of that, Ethan would eventually be thrown into prison and tortured. The closer that major event from the original story drew, the more anxious Charlotte became. If she could change the Sea Alliance's mind, then brother Ethan would not need to remonstrate with the emperor. She needed to make contact with them. When dealing with them, appearing as Charlotte would be better. But if she wanted to stop brother Ethan, appearing as Sasha would be more advantageous. It looked like she might not be able to return home just yet, but there was nothing to be done about that. Then she suddenly heard her sister's voice. The two of them were discussing her situation, worried that she might have fallen into some kind of hardship. Her sister had grown thinner than before. Charlotte told herself that she would go back as soon as the festival ended. If her uncle was here, then Joan would be here too. She had to find him. On the Grand Duke's side, his schedule had already ended. He wanted to return to his chambers and rest a little. Worried that Sasha might be bored, he planned to bring her a small reward. But when he turned around, he saw Sasha sneaking around and had no idea what she was doing. Charlotte had already asked Joan for help. All that remained was to get back before the Grand Duke. But her left foot caught her right, and she only avoided falling because the Grand Duke caught her. The Grand Duke demanded to know what she was doing. Feeling guilty, Charlotte said she had only been asking for directions. After they got back, he kicked her into the room and instructed the guards to keep an eye on her. In truth, the Grand Duke thought very highly of her. Although her behavior was reckless, he was extremely indulgent toward her. As for those who had mocked Knight Ethan before, the Grand Duke declared that they had violated military discipline, and after training ended, he stripped them of their posts in front of everyone. There were rumors that the Grand Duke had stepped in because his own subordinate had been slighted. In any case, Charlotte was already incredibly fortunate. If that was really the reason, then he truly was crossing a line. When the Grand Duke came back, he found the atmosphere strangely awkward. He assumed these people had come to bother Charlotte. The two of them hurriedly slipped away. Had those dismissed knights really been expelled because of her? Seeing the Grand Duke's Sundara-like reaction, she became even more certain. As thanks, she thought she could dry his hair or even lull him to sleep if needed. The Grand Duke said he needed none of that. While they were in the palace, she was to stay quietly in her own room. The next day, Joan had a terrible headache. She had really come. He had put the clothes in the dressing room over there. After speaking with his grandmother, everything had gone smoothly. The people of the South were extremely wary of Imperials. Compared with a young marquis, it would be much easier for a young lady to approach them. Joan suggested she might as well take the opportunity to slip away, but Charlotte said that would not do. If the Grand Duke despised her, it would have a serious impact on Brabant. The Grand Duke was currently doing his best to reject the marriage. At this rate, there should be a result before the summer night festival ended. Now it was time for Charlotte to make her move. She appeared at the banquet. She had to meet the people from the Alliance quickly and return to her room before the Grand Duke came back. Many people were worried because she said she had gone to the South. Recently, the conflict between them and the South had been rather severe. If she had not seen with her own eyes how the Emperor treated the Grand Duke, she would never have doubted whether the Emperor was truly a wise ruler. Hearing them say that the Alliance members still had not arrived in the Empire, he was even more surprised. Charlotte thought to herself that she needed to slip away quickly. The noble ladies said that being able to see Grand Duke Ludovica here was such a stroke of luck. Everyone spoke highly of the Grand Duke. Then his older sister walked over. He had left home without protest or complaint. She wondered if he might have been angry. That was why she had kept in touch with him through letters all this time. Just when Charlotte thought she was about to be hit, it turned out her sister only wanted to hug her. Charlotte threw herself into her sister's arms and said she had been doing well these past few days. Hearing that made Grace very happy, but she also hoped her sister could be happy. Charlotte thought she would quickly greet everyone, then return to her room. But she had lied to her sister and wasted far too much time. Charlotte's figure was spotted by the passing Grand Duke. He found himself a little concerned by the fact that that person had pink hair. When the Grand Duke opened the door, he saw Sasha in his room. Sasha said he had come to sing the Grand Duke a lullaby. He had thought he needed to prove he had stayed in his room the whole time, but before he knew it, he had somehow ended up here. The Grand Duke asked him whether he had seen a pink-haired woman. Sasha said no. In truth, she was panicking inside. The Grand Duke rose and said he was going to wash up, telling Sasha to get ready to sing the lullaby. So Charlotte began singing beside him. Yesterday, he had said he did not need a lullaby, yet now he suddenly wanted to hear one. He looked more tired than usual. Charlotte had hit the mark. It was true that there was very little he could do as he pleased. His subordinates followed him with almost blind devotion. The Emperor had always been overbearing and autocratic, insisting on his own way. A man like him seemed impressive in the Emperor's eyes, but in the end he was just a powerless man who could not even serve his own father. Charlotte knew that his father's body had still not been found to this day, so they had not yet held a funeral for him. Even the Grand Duke had such a fragile side. Charlotte told him he had worked hard and that everything would get better. She wished his Grace sweet dreams until morning. She had never expected to wake up on the Grand Duke's bed. She must have fallen asleep first while trying to comfort him last night. The Grand Duke was negotiating with the Emperor, and she needed to change the situation during that window of time. Joan looked rather helpless. Why wasn't she dressing the way she usually did, and instead wearing clothes that did not suit her style? On the contrary, elegance and poise suited her perfectly. To leave a good impression on the Southern delegation, she at least had to dress beautifully. Joan did not want to stay here, but Charlotte still wanted him to remain a little longer. Then the first prince arrived. Grace's misfortune had begun with the power struggle between the first prince and the first princess, so Charlotte did not like him. But because he was in frail health, it was hard for her to truly hate the first prince. Whenever the first prince praised her, she always thought he was about to collapse from illness. It was wrong to ignore another person's suffering. If anything happened to His Highness in front of her, it might hurt her sister, so she would watch him carefully. To thank her for her concern, the prince wanted to offer her his first dance. That was truly an honor, but he was more used to dancing his first dance with his usual partner. Faced with such pressure, Joan simply left. Right now, he wanted some peace and quiet. Since it was hard to refuse the first prince's request, Charlotte decided she would dance only a short while and then slip away. When the first prince once again praised her, Charlotte directly had him placed onto a stretcher. That action drew the attention of many onlookers. The people around them were full of praise for Charlotte. It seemed Miss Charlotte was especially gifted in medicine. While dealing with Joan's nagging, Charlotte suddenly noticed clothing from the south among the crowd. It seemed the Southern Sea Alliance had arrived. Surely they had not witnessed all of this chaos, had they? At that moment, she had a bad feeling. Things seemed to have become complicated. He had seen her. She had actually danced with the prince. To soothe his wounded heart, Joan sat alone in a corner. Charlotte went to get him something to eat. Unexpectedly, someone from the south approached her first. His name was Simon. Wasn't that the representative of the southern delegation? He draped his coat over Charlotte's shoulders and said she could return it later to Rouge Palace. Charlotte could speak the Western dialect. Her father was deeply devoted to education, especially language education, so she could speak it as well. He praised the dance between Charlotte and the first prince as truly beautiful, and said she was also highly skilled in medicine. The first prince was lucky to have someone like her. Although Charlotte did not understand why people from the south thought so highly of the imperial family, even if the person there had not been the first prince, she still would have helped, because that was the spirit of the Brabant family. Then a familiar voice came from a distance. The Grand Duke had arrived. If the two of them met, it would be a disaster, so she could only hurry away. Just as the door was right in front of her, Simon grabbed her wrist. He said he would wait for the day she returned his coat. Seeing the Grand Duke getting closer and closer, Charlotte said she would, then quickly left. The Grand Duke walked over and asked who that young lady was. Simon said he did not know. He had only lent her a coat. Inside Rouge Palace, no one had expected Grand Duke Ludovica to personally come and warn them. The Grand Duke's loyalty to the Emperor was known across the continent. For the sake of his own authority, the Emperor had granted the Grand Duke the title of war hero, and his influence truly could not be ignored. For the Emperor's ambitions, he had willingly become a sacrifice, a hero shackled in chains. But they absolutely could not retreat. If the dam were completed, they would lose control of the water source and face a drinking water shortage. As for that lady, fortunately, she seemed easier to approach than expected. For generations, the Brabant family had enjoyed the trust of both the people of the empire and the imperial family. The current Count Brabant was closely tied to the royals. Securing his support would change the political situation. His daughter was friendly toward the south and seemed highly accomplished in medicine. Perhaps she could cure Solomon's illness. They also needed to find someone who could treat the mysterious disease afflicting Solomon, the first leader of the Southern Federation. For the past several years, Solomon had suffered from unexplained headaches and fainting spells, though this had not yet been made public. Before internal disorder erupted, they had to prevent instability within their own government caused by the question of succession. That was why they needed Charlotte's help. Moreover, when Simon had been with Miss Brabant, Grand Duke Ludovica had seemed very interested. From beginning to end, the Grand Duke's gaze had seemed fixed solely on her, as though he were interested only in the young lady herself. The next day, at the Royal Opera House, if it had not been for the Empress's invitation, Charlotte would never have come. She absolutely must not run into the Grand Duke. Yesterday, she had been questioned again. Her excuse was that she had gone to the square for the Peach Festival, but it still felt as if the Grand Duke had grown suspicious. More importantly, she had thought the Grand Duke would not attend the celebration, which was why she had come up with this plan. Now all she wanted was to keep her head down. The play being performed that day was in the time of courtship, a love story about the first emperor of the empire and his empress. The Summer Night Festival had also been established to commemorate their love. The Crown Prince liked it very much and could relate to the story in many ways, which was why he liked this opera. Charlotte saw that his hand was trembling, so she took it and said, "Your Highness." Once again, she protected the prince's health. She wanted to stop by the Information Guild to see where Solomon's people were, but unexpectedly, she saw the fourth princess. The Grand Duke was there as well. For a moment, she had no idea which way to go, to avoid being discovered. In the end, she slipped through a nearby door. She had not expected Idris to be here. Seeing no one nearby, talking to Charlotte, he realized he was not part of the advance party and should have arrived later with the rear group for the final banquet. The situation here was complicated, but the person who knew Charlotte's true identity was right in front of her. It was a good opportunity. She wanted him to pretend to take her out of the palace on an errand, because she needed time to find the southern delegation's hiding place. She could not tell him what she was really thinking, so she could only say it was a family matter and that she wanted him to help cover for her. He agreed, but only if he could go with Charlotte. She had no other choice. Once they reached the shopping district, she wanted to first go to the Information Guild. It was in a rather secluded area. She had not planned to bring Idris along, but she needed to cautiously gather information at the guild about Solomon's organization. Suddenly, the person beside her collapsed. His skin was darkening. These were all symptoms of that illness. Just as Charlotte was about to step forward and check on him, she was stopped. If she moved any closer, that man would pierce her throat. At some point, however, Sir Idris had already pinned the man's neck with an arrow. Charlotte was a little angry. How could they draw weapons in front of a patient? She asked whether the patient's symptoms included full-body stiffness and blackened skin. They were stunned that she knew that. What a coincidence. But that was not important now. The urgent matter was saving the patient. To dispel the corrupted energy in his body, they needed evening primrose watered with holy water. And as it happened, the person who could obtain the herb the fastest, Sir Idris of the Holy Temple Knights, was right here. Charlotte said she could cure his illness and asked them to lower their sword. At Lily Palace, the Brabant family had thought he would come by on inspection today, but since he had not, they had gone to visit him instead and found no one there. Lord Solomon's body had already reached its limit. There was no time to lose. After identifying the prince's illness yesterday, he had done the same again today. They had no other choice now but to place their hopes in Miss Brabant. Just then, alarming news arrived from outside. Lord Solomon had suddenly fainted beyond the city walls. It had to happen precisely when he was away. But when they opened the door, they discovered Solomon was fine and even sitting closely with a young man. When his father had collapsed, Charlotte had happened to be passing by, and that face looked strangely familiar. It was Miss Brabant. Charlotte had not expected this old man to be the leader of the Southern Alliance. This illness had ultimately led to Ethan's death. In the middle part of the novel, she had developed the antidote and offered it before the graves of Ethan and Grace. In the original story, there were very few clearly recorded victims of this hidden poison disease, only Ethan and the sage Solomon. The reason Charlotte had considered negotiating with the Southern Alliance in the first place was because she possessed intelligence that Solomon had been poisoned. She could not ignore this old man. He reminded her of how Ethan had just stepped in to save her, and this elder was actually Solomon himself. She had unexpectedly saved such an important bargaining chip with her own hands. Even more troublesome was this perfectly timed encounter. Simon expressed his gratitude, saying he had truly been shocked when he received word from the capital. The person Charlotte had saved was his father. To repay her, she only needed to name her request. This, in turn, created an opening for negotiations with the Southern Alliance. Simon asked how she had known how to treat the illness. In the South, they had sought famous physicians everywhere, yet none could do anything. It had begun with slight headaches. Then the poison rapidly spread through the whole body, eventually causing convulsions and blackened limbs. They were extremely agitated and asked what the cause really was. To save their father, they were willing to do anything. Charlotte said it was caused by the toxic miasma of a magical beast. Back when Solomon had just taken office, he had received good news that the ancient ruins on the Moorish coast had opened, but the casualties there had been severe. So he had infiltrated the ruins alone. Later, Solomon successfully deciphered the ancient magic and set up a counter-barrier. But during that time, he had already been deeply poisoned for several months. Later, Solomon carved the magic circle into his own body to slow the poison spread, and he also created a secret manual for disabling the traps inside the ruins. He truly was an extraordinary legendary figure. The herbs gathered earlier had already been made into an emergency potion, enough to sustain him until the new herbs had grown. Strange as it was, although the original novel had been an entertaining read, how could Charlotte remember the details of the medicinal herbs so accurately? From the day she realized she was inside the novel, she had written down every key setting from the original to prepare for what might happen in the future. The fourth princess's assassination case, the investigation into the Western ancient ruins, the hidden poison disease, and even the briefly mentioned herbal knowledge all felt as if she had personally mixed the remedies herself just this year. She lost focus for a moment before Simon reminded her. When she came back to herself, he was asking about how he could repay her. She had been worrying about how to raise the matter of negotiations, so this worked out nicely. She hoped to arrange a meeting between him and Princess Cordelia. Though the Southern Alliance wished to negotiate with the royal family, secret contact carried a completely different nature. Right now, the whole continent was watching the struggle for the throne. If this were exposed, the entire Southern Alliance would be seen as belonging to the First Princess's faction. At such a sensitive time, he had no way to agree to so dangerous a request. Solomon suggested they at least hear her out. Princess Cordelia had once said that if she ascended the throne, she would strengthen exchanges with the South instead of building a dam. For them, that would be beneficial. Once construction of a dam began, war would inevitably break out. At that time, Princess Cordelia, and perhaps all of them, would be dragged into the battlefield, even the Grand Duke. For the first princess, her opposition to the dam project was perfectly reasonable. The military losses caused by war would shake the very foundation of her claim to the throne. Charlotte thought that it really did seem worth meeting the princess, and turned to look at Solomon. He nodded in agreement. To support a meeting between the Southern Alliance and Princess Cordelia, Simon decided he would write her a letter. Solomon also had her accept a box. Inside was a cloak, an invisibility mantle woven with crown pillar magic. It could make the wearer invisible once. Very few people in the world could create such an object. He possessed a kind heart and acted decisively, but perhaps that decisiveness would one day place him in grave danger. Charlotte was very grateful for the gift. Sir Idris said that she had been far too impulsive in trying to save someone earlier. Charlotte did not think so. Fortunately, he had been there. In truth, the reason she acted that way was because of her father. He had always taught her that failing to do what lay within one's power was itself a dereliction of duty, especially for someone bearing the name Brabant. Of course, she was a coward and did not have the courage her sister had to throw herself into danger for a greater cause, but she still had people she wished to protect. Idris was surprised. He understood now. She was a very brave person, upright and admirable. Among everyone he had ever met, she shone the brightest. Charlotte had already told Idris she might be a little late getting back. Since Lily Palace was close by anyway, she decided to go see her sister. Then she heard voices. Duke Hermon and her sister. He had come to warn Grace about the bride training lessons. Lately, he had heard complaints that her behavior in formal settings was rash, and that was deeply worrying. He wanted to hold the wedding directly. Every time Charlotte thought her sister had moved one step closer to happiness, it turned out to still be so far away. She understood why Grace had chosen this engagement, but feared it would ultimately repeat the original story. What on earth were they supposed to do? At that very moment, Duke Hermon unexpectedly discovered her. The Duke knew her face. She absolutely cannot be caught. If she returned now, it would only implicate the Grand Duke. She only needed to get over the wall, but she was still caught. If the matter came to light, it would surely implicate her sister. Seeing that Charlotte would not speak, they had no other option. Then, at that critical moment, the Grand Duke appeared. He asked what they thought they were doing. Duke Hermon actually dared to question one of his attendants. He turned and wrapped Charlotte up, asking whether she was all right. Charlotte was deeply moved. The knight said it was this little fellow who had tailed Duke Hermon first. She had to explain herself properly to avoid exposing her identity. So she said she had been carrying too many things and had wanted to take a shortcut and rest for a bit. The knight snatched her pouch away, refusing to believe it was just that. Unexpectedly, that really was all it was, leaving everyone stunned. Duke Hermon apologized to her. He had not known she was one of the Grand Duke's knights. The Grand Duke told them not to worry, and that there was no need for concern over the few stray words this child might have overheard. Since the Grand Duke had said so, the matter was dropped there. So it was over. It seemed she had caused the Grand Duke trouble again. The snacks she carried had been a gift from Solomon. The Grand Duke was a swordsmanship master and highly adept with magic power. He might notice something unusual. In truth, he already knew everything. He told Charlotte that if she was ever wronged in the future, she should just run, and he would deal with the aftermath. Why was he saying such things to her now? It made her want to cry. The Grand Duke embraced her. Long ago, he had already known there was something odd. He had never expected this recruit to be a woman. But now that he knew the truth, a strange feeling had arisen in his heart. Where did this knot of emotion come from? Just then, Sir Idris arrived, saying the treatment supplies were ready and that there was something needing the Grand Duke's attention. After they returned to the ducal residence, Dick thoroughly investigated noble women connected to Albrecht and Ethan, especially those who had recently gone missing. 2 weeks after the special training ended, the investigation was complete. Ethan had grown up at the Count Brabant estate, receiving knight training there, and had deep ties to the Count's family. Among noble ladies related to both the Brabant and Albrecht families, there were about 9 in total. But among them, only one had recently vanished without a trace: Charlotte. Given Ethan's former romantic relationship with the head of the Brabant family, it seemed he had also been rather close with this young lady. The engagement between the head of the Brabant family and Duke Herman was surely well known. He had clearly realized that the important person Sasha kept mentioning must be Ethan. Disguised as a man, she had actually developed feelings for her sister's former lover. The more he thought about it, the more absurd it seemed. But the meeting was approaching, and they should set out. He had not yet confirmed with his own eyes whether Sasha and Miss Brabant were the same person, so he intended to keep a close watch on her. That day, he had followed the woman's voice into the room. Sasha had looked bewildered, as if he had misunderstood his order to stay in his quarters. When he mentioned the pink-haired woman, Sasha's eyes had trembled slightly. When she lied, she was so clumsy it was almost endearing in its foolishness. He had already confirmed her identity. When he saw her at the banquet, his gaze had kept chasing after her. So this was what she looked like as a noble lady. Before he could even find an answer to that question, she was already about to be engaged. Miss Olivia had said she liked him. It was quite memorable. Her manner and style were exactly like His Majesty's, which made it unbearable, especially that grating laugh of hers and the overpowering perfume that was enough to make one sick. It genuinely disgusted him. He wanted to leave at once and go find Sasha, but then Idris said Sasha would be back late, as if dealing with His Majesty were not already enough of a headache. The more he thought about it, the more irritated he became. Idris was usually indifferent to everyone else, yet he treated Sasha differently. That fact only made him more restless. He had now begun investigating Sasha's whereabouts. The sight of Sasha flusteredly trying to help him had been absurdly amusing. On a whim, he had kept Sasha by his side. Now he had no choice but to admit that he liked Sasha. Even if Sasha harbored hidden motives, it did not matter, so long as Sasha stayed by his side. Sasha was still within his grasp. There was plenty of time ahead. A brand new day. Charlotte felt she had caused the Grand Duke a great deal of trouble. It had even led to a confrontation between the Grand Duke and Duke Herman, something that had never happened in the original story. The Grand Duke's sensitivity to magic power would definitely have noticed something strange. He must have realized it, yet he asked nothing. And after crying that day, her eyes had become swollen. She needed to hurry and deliver this letter to Princess Cordelia. The moment she opened the door, the Grand Duke was standing there, likely to ask about yesterday. She stepped outside, but the Grand Duke did not ask about yesterday. It seemed there was something else he wanted to ask. The side chapel of the palace, during the festival, was unattended during confession hours. It truly was an excellent place. Although Charlotte had mentioned it in her letter, Simon actually coming still surprised him. He said it was on a friend's recommendation. Though that made him somewhat suspicious, time was short, so they focused on the important matter first. Charlotte paid her respects to the Empress. The Empress exchanged a few simple greetings with her. For many years, the Empress had always taken good care of Charlotte, though Charlotte did not know why. Someone cautioned them that both the Emperor and Empress would attend the banquet today, so the Grand Duke surely would not come. They were also told not to stand too close together, since it was hard enough to protect themselves already. Today, they said, was the death anniversary of the Emperor's elder brother, which was also the death anniversary of the Grand Duke's father. Someone remarked that if the Grand Duke could come to the banquet and comfort His Majesty, then today, for both of them, was the memorial day of a beloved close relative. The Grand Duke rarely involved himself in high society, yet the Emperor took this chance to force him to mourn the late Crown Prince. Why had the Grand Duke still never spoken out against it? The Emperor's side was so lively, while the Grand Duke was all alone. Seeing Charlotte by herself, the Crown Prince was delighted. Wanting to make up for what had happened during the opera, he first invited her to dance. Unexpectedly, someone beat him to it. Idris stepped forward and invited her to dance. Watching the two of them, the Crown Prince's gaze turned cold. Idris said that on this day, His Grace the Grand Duke would dismiss everyone and then mourn the late Crown Prince alone. Charlotte asked why the Grand Duke was controlled by His Majesty. Idris said it was because the late Crown Prince's remains were in the Emperor's possession. Charlotte could not help glancing toward the Emperor, but before she could react, she was suddenly lifted up in Idris's arms. Idris reminded her to watch her step. That was why the Grand Duke had no choice but to remain loyal to the Emperor. On a day when everyone else was happy, the Grand Duke had always mourned his father alone. Idris had told her something this important and trusted that she would never speak of it. Then he left first. It was also time for her to change back into Sasha. But Idris caught hold of her hand, thinking it would be nice if she stayed. But in the end, he still let go and allowed her to leave. He wanted to keep hold of the one rushing toward someone else. Then another person walked over, surprised that he had actually invited someone else to dance. Idris openly admitted that she was someone he liked. Once the Grand Duke had made his appearance, he would also go back. He had to admit that his heart had moved, but he did not intend to reveal his feelings, because he was still a priest, a servant who followed divine will. At the Grand Duke's door, Charlotte hesitated over whether to go in. Every time she saw him, she thought of herself and could not help worrying about him. In the end, she knocked anyway. Her shouting outside irritated the Grand Duke immensely. The first thing he did after stepping out was pinch Charlotte's cheek. His subordinate dared to be this impudent. Charlotte said she was only worried about him. After all, drinking alone in gloom would only make things worse. It was her first time seeing the Grand Duke so dejected. The Grand Duke said there was nothing better to pass the time. Charlotte suggested that he go out for a walk with her. Today was the Summer Night Festival. She had heard there were lots of interesting things in the square outside the castle. If he refused, she would take away his wine, and she even used Hermann as an excuse. Having no other choice, the Grand Duke agreed. At the summer festival, Charlotte saw all kinds of delicious food and urged Raphael to hurry up. The Grand Duke had disguised himself a little. Now his name was Raphael. Charlotte told him to enjoy himself to the fullest. She bought 3 skewers of grilled meat. The Grand Duke said that on the battlefield, such things were a luxury. As they passed a flower shop, the Grand Duke actually bought flowers. They spent an unforgettable night together. They went boating, and the Grand Duke even teased her for her poor stamina. They drifted farther and farther from the city center, and the scenery around them grew more and more beautiful. This was a place the Grand Duke had visited as a child. Back then, he had been full of curiosity about the world outside, and he had had a friend by his side. That was someone who had grown up with him. But in the end, they died on the battlefield. To be able to remain so calm now, how much pain must he have buried in his heart? Whenever Charlotte felt sad, her sister often used this absolutely effective method. People always said they lived on through memory. She hoped today would remain in His Grace's memory for a very long time. At the Black Dragon Knight headquarters, Charlotte fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. She had barged into his life in the strangest way possible, yet he did not dislike it. Even though he had already decided to suppress his emotions and avoid having anything precious, she kept stirring up his desire. At the Central Palace Garden, as thanks for saving the first prince, Charlotte was invited to tea with the Empress. Yet the Empress herself did not appear. Why was the first prince here instead? He said Her Majesty had urgent matters, so he could have tea with Miss Charlotte in her place. Today was the final day of the festival, and there were many affairs to manage. Her sister had said that when receiving the Empress's favor, Charlotte ought to be especially careful. She could not just leave like this, could she? And this garden was personally tended by Her Majesty. So why had she been called here? The Crown Prince had heard that Charlotte liked reading. Swordsmanship manuals were books too. Charlotte felt there was no problem with that. So she said that on days when she was not practicing the sword, she usually chose to read. He said he liked reading too and gave her a pen and notebook. They seemed to be magical tools that helped with copying texts. Then the Crown Prince stood up, wanting to properly show her around the place. Charlotte felt this was starting to seem an awful lot like a date, when at that moment someone suddenly ran over with urgent news. The Crown Prince was very displeased. He remembered saying he was not to be disturbed, but the report was that the first princess had made contact with the Sea Alliance. He could only excuse himself for a moment and ask Charlotte to look around nearby. He would return soon, so she waited again and took the chance to look around.